Hello, Dan.
Howdy.
Hey Dan, hey Josh.
Hello, Kate. I picked up whatever plague was going around the summit 2 weeks
Did
ago.
you?
I spent like last week deathly ill. I feel better this week, but I'm still not great. Gotta
Sorry.
love. That's right. Like conferences. Welcome back.
At least it wasn't COVID.
I know, right?
Yeah, yeah. No,
Been there. I've been there. I think we all
think
all
we
of our
all.
immune systems are not used to this anymore.
No.
And it's hell.
Well, for me, it was
Hello.
basically a minor cold, and then all of a sudden, my hotel room allergies kicked in on top of it. So then I sounded like death warmed over. So molds and me do not get along real well. And then
Yep.
I've been on allergy medicines ever since I've come back home. Finally getting healthy again. But yeah,
Gotta love it.
you gotta love it, exactly. There's definitely ways to do things. Was it productive other than that, though? Other than catching the plague?
I thought it was fun. I mean, it's a fun show. It's funny. I was telling someone that it's basically at this point just all of us geezers hanging out, making shit up about the good old days and drinking beer together. It's like, it's good.
It looks like we've got someone new here. Excellent.
Oh, awesome. There's no rush, Marius. This meeting starts at 5 after. I did that on purpose because no one's ever ready on time. And we're supposed to end 5 minutes early, which sometimes we do, but oh, cool. Good. Welcome, Eric. And we'll do, when the meeting starts, I'll have everyone paste an intro into the chat, but it'll be a minute. It might be a light group today.
Mm-hmm.
Hello. Why is my microphone not working?
We can hear you.
Yeah.
Oh, you can hear me? Ah,
Yes.
okay.
Yeah.
I don't see that something is sending, but great. If you can hear me, that's all that counts.
It's all magic. It's fine. All right. Let's get cracking. I'm going to paste my intro before I forget. All right. So let me share my screen. And then move all the crap Zoom put in the way. All right. So here is the attendance. Let me open the chat. If everyone could sign in, that would be lovely. And this is the tools working group attendance, because this is a weird meeting where we're technically hijacking the tools working group meeting for SBOM everywhere. So paste your intro in the chat, everybody, not just new people. And then I will switch over to the SBOM everywhere agenda, which is very light today. And I forgot to send out an email, I realized, which is why I don't expect a lot of people today, but that's all right, because I don't feel good. So the less I have to do, the better. Excuse me. All right, so then SBOM everywhere agenda, I will paste a link to, and that has our use case document that we're working on that I would like us to keep working on unless someone has a more pressing topic. I guess the one thing we could add is the open source summit.
Retrospective on that, I think would be a good idea.
A quick recap. I mean,
Yep. Mhm.
I was there, Kate was there. I think I see George here. He was there, and there were probably some other people who I apologize if I feel free to just jump in. But I mean, I can give you kind of the overall feel of what was there. There was an OpenSSF day, which was, I forget what day that was, Tuesday, maybe Wednesday.
Wednesday. It was Wednesday. Mhm.
Thank you. And there was an SBOM Everywhere panel, well, an SBOM panel that obviously discussed SBOM Everywhere as part of that. And it was a good panel. My favorite question was, which SBOM format do you think will win? Which I refuse to answer. We definitely weren't touching that one. But it was good. I think the audience asked some interesting questions about SBOMs. I feel like we are approaching a place where people are using or rather getting ready to actually use these things for purposes where they want to do vulnerability scanning or regulation or whatever. And that's exciting. And I think that's also where the use case we're doing can help. But then there was obviously the open source summit, the larger conference around that. And the people I've talked to, I said there were kind of two themes I took away from it. And one was the whole supply chain everything, where people are talking about just, who's writing your software type stuff. And that's not surprising to anybody. I also think there's a long way we have to go there because there's still a lot of fear. That's the underlying message. It's not, you're using open source, let's figure out what that means. It's, oh, holy cow, do you know who's writing your open source? Like, are they criminals? It's like, oh my God, just no, don't do that. And so I think from that perspective, there's work to do, but that's a different topic. And then AI came up like constantly, where half the people think AI is going to kill us all, and half the people think it's going to save us. And they're probably both right. I don't know. Maybe those are the same thing, but it's it was good. I enjoyed the conference. I really liked it. And I will say, with all the attention SBOMs are getting, and Kate, maybe you can kind of chime in here.
Yeah.
I know there is some AI, I don't even know what to call them, but SBOMs for the AI large language models. And I don't totally understand what that means, but I have a suspicion we're going to see that collide with reality sooner than we think. So I'll stop talking now. Thank you.
Okay, well, I can actually talk a little bit. That's something we're actually working on. We actually, in the 3.0 SPDX spec, we actually have a section for AI models as well as data sets. It was very clearly separating those two out because both of them are part of the transparency we're going to need to put into the system. And so figuring out how we can start to summarize it and capture the relevant information and move it forward is something that a lot of people are interested in. There's a lot of good side hallway discussions on the topic.
Can I ask you to explain what that means, Kate? Because I know you've got the data that trains the LLM, and then you have the output of that. And what does that mean in terms of tracking what's going on? And if you don't know, it's fine. You can say like we don't know.
No, I know. I've been sitting in on meetings half a year now. Okay, so I can. At the heart of it all, these things are all just files. Okay, a training data set is a set of files. A trained model is having had the training data applied to the model. It gets shaped into a slightly different format, and being able to capture parameter. Most of this is things that are either files, groups of files, or mostly it's files and groups of files, which are effectively the equivalent of packages and basically groups of things effectively. And what we have in SBOM can actually extend a good portion. However, there are a lot of parameters associated with training models and data set that are relevant to capture. And so there's, I guess, what was it, about 4 years ago, 5 years ago, there were about 10 initiatives, model cards, data sets, and fact sheets all came out within about a 6-month period, one from IBM, one from Google, and one from Microsoft, on what types of things one should capture here on this. And when you actually do a compare and contrast across all of those, there are a couple of common elements. And so being able to sort of capture the common elements and let people be able to describe the information and provenance of how things have been created over time. And so it gets into a lot of the things we're talking about with SBOMs anyhow. And so it's just a minor extension in some ways to start to capture more of this type of information. Obviously, it's going to be new stuff in the tooling and in the spaces where we haven't been capturing SBOM stuff before, like data set creation and curation. And so as people are creating data sets, being able to record what has led to what portions of one data set, what portions of another data set are you being used to train models. But you know, these are all concepts we've seen before. So we've been working with folks from the IEEE AI ethics side, as well as other places, to try to articulate what makes sense to capture. And so if you're interested in what's in an AI bomb, there's work going on the SPDX side anyhow, and I think the Cyclone DX that love model cards. The big difference between the two approaches is that the SPDX has separated out the data sets from and having special expectations of lineage of data sets from being just with the model. And I think the Cyclone DX are just looking at the model card approach and following that pretty closely. And so we've got two different approaches going on here. I think I have a bias, which you guys know, but I think we're going to be a little bit more flexible, being able to catch data set provenance more effectively and efficiently, and that's the feedback I was hearing from the IEEE folk too, when I was talking to them. So those are things that are there in progress, and we've been starting to articulate out and use the information in fields for hand mapping of data sets and models and making sure that the use cases can be handled with what we've got, and we'll be starting to look at more and more about automation. Did that help give you the overview you're looking for?
That was awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, I saw your hand went up. Did you have anything specific you wanted to ask on the subject?
I heard something when I was listening into the panel about ethics and SBOMs, and I'm wondering whether this is related. I'm sorry, is that directly related to what you were just talking about?
Panel. I wasn't on the panel, but in space we are very focused on that, and so we have things like, so some of the properties that we've been talking about are: is there any sensitive personal information? Is there known biases? And being able to capture that in a standard format, like in a field, so that you can sort of say, this, we don't, at this point in time, there's not a lot of standard vocabularies out there to pull off of. Okay, there's a lot of initiatives, but things haven't quite gelled. So for the most part, we'll be just capturing some of these things as strings. But there's also the question of, is there a person in the loop effectively for the training?
Right.
Are you just taking in data sets? Are you doing adaptive work over time with a stream adapting, as well as are you just training it once and going from there? And then there's things like, will this data set expire? And will this model expire? Does it need to have a forced retraining at a certain point in time?
Right.
So these are things that are, considerations on the AI side that we've managed to pull in as key fields. And I think we'll be learning more as we start populating these more and more, but I think we've got a reasonable starting point. Go ahead, Sarah.
Kate, I was looking at my calendar. Can you hear me? It said I was muted, but I think I'm off. And is that the AI profile for SBOM's meeting on Wednesday that you're referring to?
Yeah, that's what's fed it in, but the AI and the dataset profiles are now both profiles in the SPDX 3.0 spec.
Okay.
They've gone from weekly meetings into formal specifications that are going to be part of the next release of SPDX.
And I haven't been able to attend those. I was just kind of looking to make sure if I can, I start attending those. And I think my calendar invite has expired.
Well, yeah, it's the same time. So if you've got an old
okay,
one,
same time, same link. Just okay. Yeah. I'll take care of that. Thank you.
Sure. But we're certainly interested in cases that we're talking about here. If there are use cases we want to have elements of AI and trained data and trained models forming a story into some sort of the scenarios. Those are interesting, making sure we can represent this information going forward. The other thing that was sort of interesting is we had a fair amount of discussions of critical infrastructure and how the SBOMs are interacting with that too, from a safety perspective. So there were some things that weren't happening in the SBOM everywhere thing, but were happening in other sessions. And so people are, I'm starting to see more and more evidence of that being of interest to the SBOM community too. There was one talk that I did with someone from UL, Pete Brink, and it was very well attended. It was the first time I'm back to seeing people literally standing around a room during the talk. I had not had that experience before for the last several years. And so basically the room was filled and then people were standing around the outsides of the room, along the walls, and then at the back of the room. So there seems to be a lot of people interested in the whole safety and how this interacts with SBOMs side, which is encouraging as well. That was my other takeaway from there. David, did you have any takeaway since you were there as well? And you were talking to a bunch of people too.
Yeah.
Okay.
Try to push the buttons. Yeah, I mean, obviously we had a lot of folks interested in SBOMs. I'm not sure I have much more to add. I'm not sure. I am concerned about, hey, just because you can capture data doesn't mean there's a use case for it. So that's, I think that we've had that discussion elsewhere, but I'm much more concerned about how do we get SBOMs actually generated by real projects and such right now, which is, I think we need to move forward on the evaluation of the tools that exist and that sort of stuff. But obviously lots of interest in SBOMs and such.
All right, before we move on, is there anyone else on the call who wants to add anything about Open Source Summit, SBOMs? I'll assume not. We'll move on. So, David, we should add your comment to an agenda. I don't know if this is the right one about, oh my goodness, what the hell is wrong with Google today? But add your comment about getting projects to produce SBOMs, because I think there's some hard truths we have to talk about in that space. Because it's easy to say open source projects should create SBOMs, but they're really busy. And I talked to Jonathan Lightshoe about this at one point, and he basically pointed out there is no way we're going to see even minor adoption by open source projects of this stuff unless we literally do the work for them. And I think he's correct. And so I think this is a discussion that we probably need to have of how to approach that, because open source projects are already busy, and this buys them literally nothing.
Well, he's not saying anything different than I haven't said. I've been repeatedly saying the challenge is the users want SBOMs. The developers have no use for them.
That's right.
So the developers have no use for them. They don't care. They do care about old, obsolete components.
I would say that the developers do have some use cases for them. So I would be careful for making those types of blanket statements here.
Okay.
Okay.
All blanket statements are probably wrong, but the challenge here.
But right now, I'm going to challenge you back with the fact that we've got automatic SBOM generation sitting in Zephyr for the last 2 years. We've had automatic SBOM generation sitting in Yocto for about as long, and they're being used.
But the issue is the same. It's Zephyr is providing the data to the end users because Zephyr thinks the end user is going to use them. And by the way, I think they're correct. but it's not like Zephyr is using internally what it's generating. It is generating the information for end users.
It is actually put the hooks into the build flow so it generates out when the build people generate out their systems.
Right, which is great. I'm not. My
So-
statement sounded like I was opposed to that. That's not what I mean. The issue though is that the Zephyr folks aren't taking their generated S-bombs and using them. They're generating the S-bombs for end users.
Well, actually, so it
If
depends
they
on
aren't, I'd love to
how
know
you
it.
say they're using them, because remember, both of these are embedded projects with limited sets of dependencies. So I
Right.
think that's part of your argumentation here, which I will not disagree with from that perspective. However, what I will say is one of Ant Micro is a Zephyr member,
Mhm.
and they basically put out a dashboard for all of the Zephyr boards on their simulators today, along with the 6 applications that they compile onto those boards. And every time they're generating out an image to run on the simulators, they're generating out an SBOM, so people have a way of checking that it is coherent and knowing exactly what's made it in.
Right.
So they're
How's this?
using them.
Perhaps a differentiator will make what I mean clearer, because I may not be communicating as clearly as I wish. Why do people choose to use compilers in a compiled language? Because trying to do it by hand would be completely ridiculous and too hard and too much effort. Okay. Why don't they just, why do we use text editors and IDEs? Because that would be a pain to use. And developers use certain tools because it would be incredibly painful and hard to develop software without using those tools. SBOM generation is different. You can choose to not generate an SBOM and still have functionality. So we've got to make it really easy to generate SBOMs, because it's awful easy for them not to do that.
I would agree, but the places, where does it make the most sense to make it?
Right. And that's a great comment, and I suspect there's probably multiple answers there. But this is the challenge. We've got to make it easy. Got to make it easy. Oh, I see Sarah's got a hand up.
Yep. Go for it,
Yep,
Sarah.
David, this reminds me of the conversation that we were having in the risk-based metrics dashboard meetings. So one of the developers that was attending that call said it's got to be, one click to generate an SBOM, one click to run the scorecard. And then we've been talking about tying those things into a end user's evaluation of upstream open source. Does it have an SBOM? What's the scorecard rating? And so we're looking to tie the ease of creating one to end user adoption, and then how might the developer, as they watch their project become adopted, want to potentially or be incentivized to improve the security scorecard. There's a whole lot of nuance to that, but at the end of the day, it sounded like one click and it actually, that information goes somewhere so someone can use it, and then there's a feedback loop.
Yeah.
So that's the way both Yocto and Zephyr are working right now, is that it is a one-line command prior to invoking a build on Zephyr, and you get it automatically. And it is also a config file change, one line, changing one option to a config file, and you get them automatically out of Yocto. And that's kind of how I think it needs for people using the open source projects.
But let me ask a follow-up then, Kate. I assume someone did a bunch of heavy lifting to get the project to that point, though, right?
Yeah, there's people in the
Right.
projects.
And that, I think, is the key. That is what we need to figure out, is what does that look like from our perspective? Tim, jump in.
Well, I agree with a lot of what's been said so far and kind of echo some of the things that Kate said. I am seeing projects that are using SBOMs as a easier point to identify that a new component has come in an unmanaged way, or a license change has trickled in a surprising way. It's useful if you make the often simple changes to get an SBOM generated, then dedicate the time to look at it you often have surprises that you want to go remediate. And I'm seeing developers on open source projects that are open to and actively doing that. Two in particular, Kubernetes and the LF Edge's Eve OS, which is primarily driven by a company called Sedata. The other way that I'm trying to think about this and encourage folks at my company to think about is, yeah, if I think in terms of salsa, and my goal then is to wait for every open source project that I depend on to reach salsa level 3, I'm going to be waiting a long time. But if I look at it from the other side, S2C2F is about the consumption set of expectations that are present. If we look at a project ourselves from a perspective of S2C2F and those types of levels of attestation, and something's missing, then it's our job to go to the project and make those appear. So I think that framework maybe provides a way to make a business argument for getting what you want, as opposed to waiting for somebody to present the things that are in salsa.
I agree with that. I like that. And I know we talked about that. It's on our charter or whatever we call the document for this group. Is that's one of the things we want to do is like go and help open source projects do this, but we're not, I mean, I don't think we've done
Well,
anything to move us.
We
in that.
actually have. We've done a lot, actually. We basically funded getting those libraries cleaned up, which makes it easier
Right.
for people to put that stuff into their own tooling.
Well, I mean, that's one thing. It's I think
Step by
it's a
step.
start. I agree. But I'm saying, Kate, I would love to see us have like a team of people that can go into a project and make this happen. But that's a more elusive goal. We'll get there. It's coming. It's I think it's getting better, and I think there are many people optimistic about all this, but I'm still running into a lot of people who are, I won't say anti-SBOM, but they're like, there's no reason I should care about this. And I think that's like what Tim just said. If you generate an SBOM as a project, and then there's a tool that says, oh, you just picked up a new open source license in your dependencies, that's a valuable thing. And those are the kind of data points I think we need to collect and be aware of that we can help just spread the word about, if that makes sense. Marius, jump in.
Yeah, hi. I hope you can hear me.
Yep.
Great. When I hear you talking about it, so to assemble people that do something like that, go into teams, what I'm thinking about is how far will we go to generate a SBOM? Because there are a lot of different aspects of quality SBOM can have. We can enrich it. We can only generate minimum requirements. We can generate a SBOM that's literally not really an SBOM because there's no data in it. Would it be maybe an idea to say, if we do something like that, that we have some kind of level that we say, okay, we go to a project and bring you on a level that we integrate in your CI/CD pipeline some auto generation tools like Thift that just generates an SBOM without knowing, okay, is it really a great SBOM, because you can always enhance it up to the point that we're sure that everything is in there that should be in there. But that's the question I think about when I would go to some project and do that for them. How far should I go at that point? I hope you understand what I mean.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I mean, I would answer that as like take a very MVP approach, right? Like minimum viable product, minimum viable SBOM. But if we make it too big, you fail, right? But if step one is just run a tool that generates an SBOM magically, like that's a big first step. And once you have that, then you can go to the next step. And I think things like this, having like a playbook that helpers can use to go to a project and say, here is the steps we're going to take. Like step one is just generate an SBOM. It's machine generated. We aren't going to do a ton of verification to make sure it's correct. We're just going to start here. And then once you have that step, then you can go farther and farther. And so I think a playbook would make sense.
So I think we need to basically separate out though here. Are we doing source SBOMs or are we doing build SBOMs?
Yes, the answer is yes, Kate.
Exactly. And I think there's different playbooks associated with each. For the source SBOM today, if your project's up on GitHub, you can click a button and get it. And that's easy. Okay, now the question is, what are we doing with it? What are the processes? There's a lot more processes, but I think GitHub has made it pretty easy for people to just see the source SBOMs. Now, for the build SBOMs, this is where, okay, how are they building their projects and what are they into? Okay, because these projects happen inside of, usually, they might be inside of a distro, they might be inside of a packaging component system. What is the build flow for a package?
Right. And this is where I think the expertise will be needed, because a lot of projects are going to try to look at this and be like, I give up. It's too hard.
Mm-hmm.
Holy cow, this conversation took quite the turn. That's good though. Okay, so we're at the bottom of the hour. We have a little bit of time left, and I guess I can see two paths we can take, and I'll leave it up to the audience or the crowd. I don't know, the attendees, whatever. All of you, we can look at the use cases for security, or we could discuss what we want this particular proposal to look like, of how do we, because we've never really written down how to go to a project and work with them to create SBOMs. And I think, like, for example, Kate mentions GitHub will give you a source SBOM for free. How many people know that? Probably not many.
I know.
And so,
Yeah.
Eric,
And you know what? Maybe the correct solution, Josh, to answer that is, here's your one page. Here's what to do.
No,
If it took
no,
more than
I
one
don't.
page, there's a
I
problem.
don't think we can do that, David. I think we need, here's a page of what we're going to help you do. And I want to be very particular about that. We have to send help. We can't send a document. We are the Calvary.
If we have to show up for several million projects, I'm not sure that works either.
It doesn't scale.
I agree with you that just a static document doesn't do anything, but it does. Trying to do, hey, we're going to show up at a million projects individually, one by one, right? It doesn't scale.
We know, but we also don't know where to start. And making a document, I don't think it's helpful without experience. Eric, do you have your hands up?
I was only going to respond to the prior discussion about GitHub's generation and the quality aspects. Just not all SBOMs are created equal, so something to keep in mind. I think it's a great first step. I think there's other people also allowing you to generate an SBOM. That's why I'm on this call. So if it's not the correct time to bring that up, I will take a break. But I just think there's other aspects. Can you do attestations? Does that tie back to that public SBOM? Stuff like that.
I think those are all incredibly valid questions, and it's always a good time to bring it up. But I also want us to be mindful that while those are valid questions, they're probably questions for day 2 or 3 of this, not day 0. And we're on day 0. Because I know, like, one of the things I've seen is you'll talk with someone about making SBOMs, and then someone will inevitably show up and talk about, oh, you have to sign your SBOM. So you have attestation, and then you have provenance and all this. And they're at the end of the conversation, they're like, I don't care anymore. Like, I'm not going to do any of this. And so I think we need to be mindful of how we approach this and how we want to talk about it. Like, I don't know. I assume the GitHub SBOMs don't provide any provenance data today.
They're very lightweight. They don't contain vulnerabilities. They don't necessarily contain the full tree. So,
but that's okay. I mean, SBOM shouldn't contain vulnerabilities, right? Vulnerabilities are something different. You use the SBOM to get the vulnerabilities, not contain in the SBOM, and that's fine. And we can deal with that. Although I guess they do have Dependabot though, but whatever, it doesn't matter. I think step 1 is SBOM, right? That's it. It doesn't matter if it sucks. Just SBOM as step 1, I think is the key. All right, so back to my question. Do we want to look at use cases, or do we want to discuss what we think something would look like where we try to acquire some resources and go and help some projects.
Well, we've already got a punch list that OpenSSF together of the key projects. So if anything was going to happen in that direction, I'd say bias it towards those ones.
You mean the alpha projects?
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense. Sarah, what's up?
I think that makes a lot of sense to prioritize the projects. There's the talk about a refresh of the mobilization plan, and basically the mobilization plan is going to show where funding should be channeled in order to accelerate these trouble areas. So we've got a proposal out, but we haven't identified the specific activities. So if you look at Kroeb's proposals, he has kind of this overarching set of goals that the special interest group wants to accomplish. And then he outlines very specific actions that you could go fund. And so I really like the direction of where the conversation is headed today, that we could prioritize a list of projects that are highly used, maybe straight from Alpha and Omega, and say we want to make it one-click easy button to do SBOMs in these top projects. What effort do we think that will take? What resources do we think that will take? And then that could be part of one of our proposal suggestions for funding stream. And we can start to really get some traction behind that.
So I don't know if funding is the answer to this one, because we just don't know what we don't know. I think what we need some people to go and do the work. And that's a very different ask, I think, than funding, because obviously the GB can't allocate people. We need companies like Dell and Microsoft and whoever to step up and say, like, we're going to dedicate a resource to helping with this project.
Yeah. And when I say think of funding, I think of perhaps paying a contractor to go do something, or hey, we are going to commit a resource from a company to go do that, because time is money. So how do we get someone's time? Either a company donates that, or maybe through just general funding, you could purchase contract time.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have an example of the other groups trying to do this, Sarah?
I love the education one. That's the one I was inspired by. And so I've got to go dig up the link. But basically, Kroeb put out a list of goals, and then he had 3 areas that would need funded or resourced to action the goal. And so what we've done is Dan and I have created our list of goals. We've kind of noodled on it, but now kind of that next step is then, okay, what do we think it will take to action that goal? Is it people? How many people? How long? If we were to get contractors instead of donated resources, what would that number be? And then that gives something for business people to hold on to and go, oh, okay, I can chew on this now. I know I have got an suggested action plan. I'll see if I can find the link to Kroeb's education one, because I thought it was really well done.
How do you know how much luck they've had at like the GB getting like movement on that?
So it's the movement from the GB in my perspective has been slow, because it's been a timing thing. Right when they were putting these 2 proposals in, one for education special interest group and one for kind of like a risk-based vulnerability response team, Omkar and Brian kind of had done a handoff. Then we had the open source summit, and now the governing board is sent those 2 proposals to a subcommittee called the Budget and Finance Subcommittee. I don't know how that's evolved, but I can try to find out how that's going.
It's moving, like it's in the machine.
I think it's in the machine, yes.
Okay, I mean, that gives me hope, because
yeah,
it's always difficult with these kind of groups when people have great ideas and then that's all.
right. And then where did it go? Off into the unknown. So no, I think it's moving. And I think if we were to propose one around SBOM everywhere, we'll get a lot of traction because there's this talk about the, ever elusive, what does it mean, quote unquote, Sterling tool chain. Well, if you look at a specific components of making SBOM easier, I think that would be table stakes as being part of a tool chain that would help evolve this. So if we can get our proposal and funding ideas kind of up to the governing board, through the TAC governing board to this budget and finance committee, I think we'll get some traction and visibility on our ideas.
Okay. Okay, so we've got 15 minutes. What I hear, and everyone can jump in here, we need to write down a proposal that kind of explains our intent of acquiring, I'll just say people, and people can be contractors or folks from a company or whatever, but we need people to go into, let's say, some of the projects from Alpha and Alpha and Omega. That's like a dangerous way to describe the Alpha projects. That sounds horrifying, but go into these projects from the Alpha project and just kind of figure out what to do. Does that, I mean, that sounds so squishy, but I don't know how else to describe it. I feel like, David, you're good at explaining things like this. Like, how can we even describe this other than like go fishing?
I'll pause it. DT has her hand up too. If David wants to pause and ponder.
Sure, let's do
Hi,
that.
hi,
Thank you.
Josh. This is my first meeting, so I apologize if I'm on a different topic in my head versus what is being discussed. But what I'm hearing is we are just looking for where to basically start to solve general issue of having an SBOM for everyone from open source community, right? Is that the right understanding?
I think that's reasonable, yes. And
Okay.
then, yeah.
So I was thinking we have so many companies on this call right now. How about a survey? What are their problem areas? And then, go from there. Because, for example, the other day someone came to me asking, hey, there are some components from open source which we just pick up from GitHub, but we don't know exactly where does it belong. Should we just say GitHub, or who is the original source of this? The supplier information, that the minimum NTIA element that we need. That is like one of the problem areas, right? And to the response, like my response was, hey, if we are pulling from GitHub, let's just say that that's the supplier, but is it the original supplier? So if we could just do a survey with all the folks in the industry asking, hey, what are the exact problem areas, that could help you kind of define the goal and take actions. That's just my 2 cents.
I don't think you're wrong, but I think that is that the supply chain working group? Probably. I'm not sure if that's exactly this group.
Okay.
I don't know, but I understand your problem. We all suffer from it. All right. We have 10 minutes. Okay. Sarah put links in the chat to the education SIG and some of what they're doing. And so we can look at that. Here's what I want to do. We have a use case document that we haven't looked at all. I think this is a good document and we need to keep working on this. And I'll try to put a little time into that next week, hopefully when I'm not ill. But I also would like to start writing this down, like this stuff here. What does that look like? Base it off of the education SIG work. So they've got what? They've got three things to do. We really only have one. But these also have like concrete milestones. And so I think that's going to be one of our challenges is we don't have milestones because we don't know what we're even asking for right now, which is also terrifying.
I don't know if I'm not that negative here. I actually do think we know what we want.
Well, no, no.
We want to make it easy. We want to make it easy, so I know you're being rhetorical for purpose, but I'm going to push.
Right. And
And
we know what we want. We don't know how to get it. And I feel like, how do we go to a group like the governing board and say, we want to send a person to, I don't know a project even name, but let's just, to this project. And we want them to figure out what it would mean for that project to generate an SBOM. That feels really squishy.
for their build. And the question, yeah.
Yes, for the build. I'm fine putting a focus on the build. I think that's an appropriate location at the moment. And especially the build is the thing most of us consume. So that's what we actually want. I don't know how to say that without sounding like an idiot. Like, that's the challenge, I think. And maybe we just start writing it down and we can ask hard questions and figure it out.
Okay, now I interrupted David when he was pondering his thoughts, and hopefully he's got his thoughts back together now to let Aditi have her say. So I just wanted to make sure that we circle back to him and be polite here.
Well, yeah, thank you. I mean, I actually I actually agree with Josh that trying to apply the tools to specific projects as a way to get started it's a helpful way to get rid of the, hey, there's lots of complications. We do need to still, but that will still quickly move us on to evaluating, specific tools for specific cases. I'm not sure if that completely really answered the question, but that maybe sounds like a step forward here.
I don't understand what you just described. You're saying just go and try it, or
pick a couple projects that don't currently generate SBOMs. What would it take? And the result hopefully would be several more projects that are generating SBOMs. And the process we have better understanding of the current challenge.
Would that have to be new projects? Because as Kate mentioned, Zephyr and others have done this. I actually know that Istio has been doing this because one of our people basically did exactly that, joining the Istio project and help them building SPDX SBOM. So there are use cases or there are case studies out there that we can look at already, kind of. I'm wondering all the time when we say we go out to projects and help them adopt this. Devil's advocate question: would they really like this? Because who maintains this going forward, right? Just going there, doing things once is nice and fine, but then stuff breaks because computers, And so new versions. Yeah. So just something to add to the document, I would say, to also plan for maintenance and not just trying to spread SBOMs everywhere, but also keep in mind that stuff needs to continue working.
Yeah, for sure, 100%.
Absolutely.
Sarah, I don't know if you were laughing or crying with that emoji, so I'll let you talk.
I was laughing when he said, because computers. And I was like, yes. May I share my screen real quick?
Yeah, let me stop that. There you
go. Okay. Let's see. I really want to hide the floating meeting controls. Okay, so this is an example of what Krob did for the education SIG. He said, here's the problem, here's the proposed plan to touch on each one of those problems. And so if you go into those, it's like, here's exactly what we need to do. Here's what we need people to do. Here's how much those people will cost for X amount of time. So it's very, business oriented. If we look at, and he also made this as a TAC issue. So the TAC will see this, approve this, and then it would go, the idea is that it would go to the governing board. We've started just within, not as a TAC issue, but just as part of our SBOM Everywhere special interest group, we've started the same thing. What's the problem? What are the things that we need to do to accomplish it. We haven't yet gone to that next step where we say what actions by whom for how long do we feel like we need to take. When we've been talking about establishing an OpenSSF toolchain for SBOMs, it'd be interesting to say, to further this out with a set of tactical activities that X amount of people or resources from companies or contractors should go to these top 3 projects in alpha, and perform a process to generate a build SBOM in 1 click, and document what that process was so that it can be repeatable across other projects that want to consume potentially the methodology, and then maybe a tail for maintaining that infrastructure. And then also there's this section on documenting user needs, and I forget where we put that. Dan, you might be able to help me.
Up in the top section, the landscape section.
Yes. And so what I think, this document goes to a blank document on my Google Drive. What I feel like would be cool to do as it evolves is change this to the user needs document, or the personas document that Kate has, so that as we're accomplishing this map the landscape part, we have people or resources or like a sub team that's going in and continuing to push that forward and pulse on that, and we can document what it will take to continue to map the SBOM landscape. So I feel like we're getting close. We'd have to keep create that like resource, time, execution, action for each of these areas, just in the same similar way that Crobe did his. So that's my
I like
plug.
that. So let me ask, the personas, is that outside of the use cases document? Because we talk about some personas in here, but it's not very well done. Kate, do you have a different document?
She has a great document. I wanted to build on it. I don't have it in front of me, so I'll stop sharing.
I'm trying to think which one you're thinking about, Sarah. Sorry.
Let me look through my notes. Maybe I can scare it up real quick. I really liked it.
All right, so do me a favor, Sarah, can you just drop it in the notes from today, and then we can reference back to that? But okay, so we've got to go in a few minutes. I do need a bio break before our next meeting. So here's what I want to do, and here's going to be my ask for everyone, is if you look in the document, the notes for today, at the bottom, there's the use cases. That could always use review, and if people want to take a look at that. There's the education SIG plan that Sarah linked us to. I would value some research and just understanding of that. And then I think I see 2 tasks, and I'm going to give them to me. One is to start scribbling down some of what we just talked about around how can we create a plan to go and do an SBOM. And I don't mean like a plan we can bring everywhere. I just mean like we need to go figure this the hell out for one project, and then we can start documenting it and building it from there. Because I think there's so much we don't know, and it scares the bejesus out of me on a regular basis. And if we can get, funding would be great, but if we can just send a person or 2, that's really what we need. Or even find someone doing this, like from Zephyr, and just like talk to them. That might be also acceptable.
I think why don't we can talk to Josh from Yocto. Or we can reach out to him, or we can, But the thing, the subtlety here is being elided over is the build SBOMs don't necessarily happen in the project itself. It happens in some sort of packaging system, some sort of landscape system.
Right. That's a good point.
Okay. And so don't underestimate that aspect. Because I think the projects themselves, they don't know how they're being combined in different places and how they're all being pulled together. So I think, I'm wondering, quite frankly, are the projects the right place to even focus initially for the SBOM everywhere? Or should we be focusing on the infrastructures?
So you're thinking focus on like NPM, or well, NPM's weird. But like those, like the packaging ecosystems you're saying, or something else?
Yeah, packaging, distros, Red Hats, the other ones that are pulling things together in a context, part of a system. And that's where the build SBOMs have the value. Yeah. That's actually, Tim, that's a good one. Avi, maybe let's we can get Avi to come over. If you could maybe bridge out to Avi and see if he's willing to talk about what's been happening in LF Edge.
Will do.
I think that would actually be a really good talk in 2 weeks' time.
That would be amazing.
That is one that I'm not actively with my favorite, which is also good because that gives an external perspective for some of the things too.
Would the
It's not.
As I mentioned before, one of my colleagues did this for Istio, so Indigo, CNCF, landscape ecosystem, something. You think it might be valuable? I can also ask her if she has something to share with this group. So
that'd be awesome. That'd be awesome, George. If I've asked her, so I'm just sort of wondering for the next meeting, Josh, can we dedicate it to having people who've applied generating these SBOMs into their projects and into their environments. But like I say, the LF Edge stuff and so
I would
forth.
love that.
Pulling a set of things together.
But who's going to get people, right? Like I'm not going to do it.
I just volunteered to see if you could get Avi, and just volunteered to find if he could get the ISIO.
Okay, so Tim and George are going to try to wrangle some people, and Sarah.
I can kindly ask her. Yeah.
No, that's not what I heard. That's not what I heard, George.
I can see if we can bring somebody.
Okay.
So I'm happy to help recruit, but I need a clear understanding of what I'm recruiting for. So like,
the experiences of trying to generate SBOMs projects, in build systems.
Okay.
Although it's limited time, I can self-volunteer for the best practices badge. We aren't generating an SBOM, and we know we want to. So I've got limited time to work on that, but I can certainly make the project do it.
Okay, so here's what I want, though. Yes, Sarah, I'm going to put you on the hook for this also. That's what 4 people: Tim, George, Sarah, and Dan, to acquire someone who can speak to us about their experiences in having their project create SBOMs. I'm going to ask that I'll create right after this meeting, I'll create the next meeting's agenda. And as soon as can you write some names down that way? I also, if 4 people show up, that's a very different conversation than if 1 or 2 people show up, right? Because now you have a much limited time versus an hour. So the sooner the better would be very valuable. Okay, we need to bail, but holy cow, this meeting was drinking from the fire hose. I expected a slow, boring meeting. This is good though. I appreciate it. I will see you all soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Josh.